Okay, we're going to be going over chapter 3 now, which is going to discuss who plays and what happens to them when they play. So go ahead, get your PowerPoint pulled up for chapter 3, and go ahead to the second slide technically with socialization. Maine's definition is on the title page. So what we're going to look at, when we're exploring this today is obviously who plays, how they play, why do they stay involved, how do they stay involved. So, the main definition is at the active process of learning social development. So this occurs when we interact with others and we become familiar with the social worlds in which we live in. Go ahead to the next slide. So socialization in an activity specifically occurs when a couple things happens. One, connection with others, which makes, a lot of sense. You're going to start to socialize with people as you build relationships with them. Two, really understanding the information within the environment that you're in. Three, making decisions that influence not only your life, but also the world around you. So that's when this becomes an active process. Go ahead to the next slide. So social learning occurs as people internalize the rules that they have within society. So, think about the rules that you had within your family. Think about the rules in all the different schools that you attended. So elementary school, high school, now college. What kind of rules, did you have? Interactions with peers. How do you interact with individuals, and what kind of guidelines did you have to follow? And then the images and messages that you have received through the media, those have all kind of influenced how you start to integrate yourself within society. Go ahead to the next slide. So we have a picture here of a family doing a race. And so, the slide talks about, just being lifelong participants in activities. And really for children, a big influence for them is who? Their parents, as this picture shows here. How active were your parents? How involved were they? And we're going to go into more detail here in a second. Go ahead to the next slide. So becoming and staying involved in sports. Throughout this entire chapter, they talk a lot of different studies, so they get really specific with some authors and what they found, and we'll kind of go through those fairly quickly. But there's some main things I want you to take away from what they have found. So participation is related to these three things. So people that become and stay involved in sports, it's based on their abilities, which seems pretty obvious. If, you're not very good at something, it might be difficult to continue to participate in that. Characteristics of that sport, you have sports that involve a lot of running, you have sports that are way more technical, you have sports that are physical, some that are not, individual, team. There's all sorts of characteristics which would influence whether you would continue to play it or not. Resources. Do you have access to a basketball court? Do you have access to a skiing hill, a tennis court, soccer field? So do you have access, to equipment, coaches, all of that? Other things that influence whether you become involved and staying involved is the influence of significant others. So when we define significant others, obviously parents, siblings, friends, teachers, all of those types of people could really influence whether you participate or not. And then the availability of opportunities to play and enjoy the sport. So we already touched on resources. Now, is there a league for you to actually play in? Is there actually competition for you within, the social world that you live in? So again, think about, for example, we've added lacrosse at Wartburg. Lacrosse is a varsity sport here. When you think about high school athletes, though, in the state of Iowa, the opportunity to play lacrosse at the high school level is not there. You literally cannot play for a high school. There is no high school lacrosse, like an official sport. Maybe some of your schools had club lacrosse, but there is not an official high school sport here. So that opportunity is difficult. Go ahead to the next slide. So like I said, there's going to be all these studies that you need to read through in the chapter, and they all kind of find something different. So this first study from the UK, really looked at children who defined sports important in their lives, and what they found is sports were integrated into their families, which doesn't seem surprising, and it was their everyday life. They were exposed to it. Parents did not coach or critique their children's sports participation, and parents were not obsessed with pushing their children to excel. Without family support, think again back to yourself. Without your parents driving you there, signing you up for camps, watching you play, would you have continued to participate in that? And that makes it difficult. Participation barriers often exist in children's lives because, again, there's some factors that are out of their control. Things cost money, you have to get a ride, you have to get parents' permission, and if the parents aren't supportive of those things or can't support those things for whatever reason, then the likelihood of them participating is pretty slim. Go ahead to the next slide. So actually our author did a study as well, and deciding to play sports depends on a handful of things. Connections with interest and goals. So again, that seems pretty obvious. So if you're an individual and you really enjoy team sports, it may be difficult for you to start to join an individual sport or vice versa. Desire to develop and display competency. So each person, if they're going to play, it's really, do they have a strong interest and desire to show what they can do, their talent. Social support and access to resources, which we've already hammered quite a bit. Memories of past experiences in sport. So, you may have a good experience that you build off of, or, maybe it's a poor experience and you don't want to play it anymore. Maybe you had a bad coach, bad teammates, just, a bad environment, or a really good one. That could also influence, whether you're going to play a sport or not. Sport images and what you see. So when you have access to images of events and things like that, and that's what will be key as we talk about, different races being involved in different sports, gender issues, women having visual images of other women doing those sports, which then will help them, think about participating. Go ahead to the next slide. So now we're on the young study. They found becoming an athlete occurs in context of sports subculture, and it involves a couple different things. So they're kind of looking at, the breakdown of the sport. It's a little bit more specific. So you have to have knowledge about the sport. You start to interact with people who play the sport. Learning how to participate occurs, and what expectations are put on the athlete, and being recognized and accepted. So, that's what they found. So in summary, and this is the most important slide, the process of becoming and staying involved in sports involves decisions influenced by self-reflection. So how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as talented? Do you see yourself as someone who understands the game, somebody who can execute what's being asked of you? 2, social support and resources. Does your family support it? Your friends are doing it. Do you have resources? Do you have the money to participate? Do you have, a ride to these events? Do you have a soccer field, a baseball field, a skiing hill, a lacrosse, team? Do you have those things? Social acceptance. So again, are your friends doing it? Is it something that you feel is acceptable within the social world that you live in? And I'm sure for all of you that changed, from elementary school, middle school, high school to now in college, and it's going to change as you get out of college. Cultural images and messages. So what are you seeing on a day-to-day basis? What's on TV? What's in the magazines? What's on the internet? What's getting tweeted, Instagrammed, all of that? What images are you getting exposed to? And, there's different meanings. What's important to point out here, there's different meanings attached to gender, class, race, skin color, ethnicity, age. We'll talk a lot about age too, physical abilities or disabilities, and how you connect with sports. Go ahead to the next slide. So we just discussed why people, decide to play. Now we're going to look at changing or ending participation. And each of you, I'll be, reading your bios. That's one of the first assignments that you did, and I'll be interested to see how many of you are currently participating in some type of sports, whether it's intramurals or varsity sports or a club sport. How many of you aren't anymore? How many maybe quit in high school? Maybe, whenever you ended your participation, learning more about why you ended your participation and getting your feedback on, what the book talks about and why people end their participation. So past research has shown people don't drop out of sports forever. So it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. None of it. I don't want to participate in any capacity. You just kind of shift your sports role. It may go from, I don't want to be on the varsity basketball team, but you still pick up a ball and do pickup games and things like that. Dropping out is tied to other changes and transitions in a person's life. So I am a head coach here, obviously, and I have found that when young women in my program decide no longer to play, most of the time it's because they're transitioning into their next phase of life, and they want to focus on that. So whether it's their studies or an internship or a job, they just want to put their time more into that than the sport. And I would find that some of you may find that true too, even if you decided to not participate back in high school. Think about high school. Sometimes people stop participating in certain sports because they're transitioning into focusing on one sport. I was a 4-sport athlete, and now I know in college I want to play basketball, so I'm going to put my efforts in that. So it's more about transitioning into something new than really anything negative. Dropping out segues right into the next point. Dropping out isn't always because it's negative. Like I just got done saying, more times than not, individuals who end up leaving the women's soccer team, it's not really a negative thing. Don't get me wrong, we've probably had a few, but overall, it's usually just, I don't want to do this anymore and I want to do something else. And I would ask you to kind of reflect on when you were playing sports and some of the different sports that you did. Why did you end your participation? And really think about it. Why did you end it? And I'm sure some of you do have some negative stories. I had a bad coach, had bad teammates, it wasn't a good experience. But I'm sure some of you would say, well, I just stopped playing because I wanted to do something else. Dropping out may cause problems among those who have identity completely in the sport. So I've seen this. I have had athletes who have gotten injured and can no longer play, and they're really lost. I've seen seniors, girls who are graduating, really struggle with the idea that sports are done because this is who they are. They were a women's soccer player. Their whole life, that's a huge part of their identity. So people who stop or drop out of sports, they struggle when the majority of their identity is just the sport and they have nothing else. Also, dropping out may cause problems with lack of social and material resources. So material resources, we're talking like the pros, the big times, the people that make money while they're playing. We're not talking about, Wartburg College athletes, but we would be talking about Division I athletes who are getting paid to go to school. If they decided to quit, then they're no longer going to receive money to go to school, and that's a big deal. Lack of social support, that could be a variety of things. You could have, parents very upset with you not playing anymore, which I have seen firsthand. You could see your friends. Sometimes I think people are afraid to quit a sport because their friends are playing it. And then they kind of question, will we still be friends if I'm not in the sport? So those are some of the issues that, could be caused by dropping or ending participation. Go ahead to the next slide. So there was an additional study our author did based on burnout, and we're going to continue to talk about burnout. The biggest thing to take away from this is that burnout really is seen in more high-performance sports, where athletes had very little control of their schedule and just essentially their life. They were being told exactly what to do, and that's when you see burnout a lot. Sport involvement was perceived to interfere with accomplishing important development tasks, essentially developing their own identity. Burnout is one of these words that I say is like a hot word, like everyone wants to use. I was burnt out, and it seems to be a really easy excuse, a really easy cop-out for why people end their sports participation. I have found over time the word burnout is used completely in the wrong context a lot of times when athletes say, well, I was burnt out. Again, a burnt out athlete is somebody who has been highly involved, playing at a high level. Again, this could be an elementary student. It doesn't have to be a D1 athlete, but really are engulfed in a sport and have no control over the decisions about when they play, how they play. Go ahead to the next slide. So another study, ending or reducing sports participation, they have also found, is related to needing to obtain a job and become more independent. And honestly, seen that even at this level. Realistic judgment about sports skills and chances of future success in the elite sports. So all of us, well, I shouldn't say all of us, I would ask you to think about if that was you. I mean, that was definitely me. I played, if you read my bio, I was a volleyball, basketball, soccer athlete all through high school. And, I quit playing volleyball my senior year of high school because I had a realistic judgment on my talents. I was good, but I wasn't great. And, I didn't really know if it was really going to be something that I was going to be successful in the future. And everybody kind of gets to that crossroads if they have a really honest conversation with themselves. After ending elite training, most people continue to stay active in some capacity. When I have athletes who are dealing with injuries, I always talk to them about, you want to be active the rest of your life. I mean, yes, soccer right now is very important, but you've been active your whole life. You're going to want to continue to be active. Go ahead to the next slide. So continuing with some other findings, they discussed main challenges faced by athletes with disabilities, and really it's in, reinvesting time and other activities and relationships, reconnecting with family members and friends, and returning to school, and their, potential future jobs. So again, these are the main challenges athletes face with, disabilities. Go ahead to the next slide. So in summary, which again, if we're going to look at all of these, this is the slide that you're going to want to know, changing and ending competitive sports participation is related to decision-making process in the people's lives, identifying issues and development issues, life transitions, deciding to do other self, and then self-reflection again. How good are you at the sport? What's the sport's role in your life? How passionate are you about it? Go ahead to the next slide. So now we're going to discuss being involved in sports and what happens. So in some cultures, people mistakenly believe that playing sports automatically builds these positive character traits. And this section is going to kind of upset you. I think as we continue to talk about sports and building character, one thing that I have found in my time teaching this course is that this really bothers a lot of students because you really believe, listen, sports are great. Sports are very positive, but that's not always the case. So it is one of the great sports myths. Go ahead to the next slide that says factors often overlooked on building sports characters. So a lot of times sports participation offers a diverse experience, both positive and negative. It's not always positive. You aren't always learning good things through sports, unfortunately. Selection process and organization of sports favor some characteristics over others. So here's what that means. People who decide to play sports already have certain characteristics that people who don't want to play sports don't have. Just like there's going to be people who are passionate about music and the arts, and they have characteristics that people who decide not to do that don't have. I hope this is making sense to you. Meaning given to sports experience varied by athletes, and lessons learned and lessons applied, varied widely. So we've been talking about this already quite a bit. Depending on the environment you are in and the meaning you give to the sport, that's, it's going to change and be very different. So an athlete at, even Central College on the women's soccer team, their meaning and sport experience is going to be really different than the one on, at Wartburg College. And we're a Division III school, small, private, but there's going to be differences there. So, that's why it's difficult to say that everything's going to be positive. Go ahead to the next slide. It's going to continue on. So, now we have, 3 more. Meaning given to the sports experience changes over time. So something that you did when you were 14 is going to look a lot different than when you're 19. Or something that you did when you were 9 is going to look a lot different than when you were 16. Social relationships, experiences and how that affects them. And then the socialization that occurs in the sports may occur in other activities. So things that you're doing in sports, team building, leadership, interacting with others, that could happen in the classroom. That could happen in clubs. It could happen in your neighborhood. So some of those things could actually occur in other activities as well. Go ahead to the next slide. So sports participation produces positive effects when these things happen, okay? So when sports provide opportunities to explore non-sport identities. So when you start to learn about yourself, that helps you develop a sense of who you are without just being associated with the sport. Knowledge building experiences that go beyond the locker room and the playing field. So when you start to learn things that you can apply to your outside world, and that it's not just on the soccer field or in the locker room. One example I always give is, I teach my girls, early is on time is late. That is our thing. And really my hope is as they continue to move on as a professional in whatever, career they're in, that they continue to think that way. I'm going to be the type of person that is early and ready to go, not the person that just shows up on time. And that's just one lesson that, essentially is a rule on our team, and we need to use it within the soccer world. But I do hope they, continue to use that outside of soccer. New relationships with people are not connected with sports. So you build relationships with people, and it's not just because you're on the same team. You have a friendship that goes beyond just making sure that you're, at the basketball courts together. It's bigger than that. And I would, again, I would use that comparison to people on my team who decide to no longer play, and their friendships with the people still on the team are exactly the same. Go ahead to the next slide. It's going to continue on here. So, examples of how lessons learned in sports can be applied to non-sports situation, which I already gave you an example of. Opportunities to develop and display competence in non-sport activities become linked with mentors and actives in the process. So what that slide is essentially saying is that you're able to be, kind of show what you can do outside of sports activities, and you make connections with individuals as well. So a general summary, okay? Negative social effects are most likely when sports, give limits and person's identity and relationships and experiences. Positive effects are when they expand and diversify that individual's experience. So there's two different sports that we're going to look at. And the first one is power and performance. And I've listed all of these things here. So there's power and performance sports, there's pleasure and participation sports. Power and performance. Understand these 6 things, and I'm going to expand on them, So power and performance sports pursue victories. You want to win. You want to win. So the biggest examples I can give is college sports. You're here to win, and that's what people are looking for. Excellence are proved through winning. So your way of showing how good you are at something is through wins and losses. Your body is a tool and a weapon. So you see yourself as a tool in the victories. You use your body as a weapon to destroy your opponents, which, the competence is based on inclusion/exclusion. So meaning, we're only going to include the people who can help us win, and we're going to exclude the individuals who cannot get it done, okay? There is a hierarchy structure, so let's think of it this way. Wartburg Athletics. I have an athletic director who's my boss, then it's me, then underneath me is my assistants, and underneath my assistants is the captains, and then the seniors and juniors and so on. So there's a hierarchy system, and there is an order, there are people in charge making the decisions. And the last one is the opponents. They're our enemies. You just loathe them. You look at them, you want to destroy them. They are between you and your victory, so they are your enemies. Pleasure and participation sports, completely the opposite, okay? I mean, that's pretty obvious. So there's an emphasis more on connections and between people. So you're getting together to play, to make friends and interact with others. When you're playing, it's more about enjoyment or staying healthy and just having fun. You're not worried about winning or losing. You're just out there to have fun. You use your body as a source of pleasure. So when you go and do the sport or activity, you're doing it because it makes you happy and it makes your body happy. The whole idea behind pleasure and participation is inclusion and accommodation of differences. So you want people of all talents and sizes and colors and all of that to participate. You don't really care how good they are at the sport. You just want everybody. And you essentially adapt and make rules so that people of all types of people can participate. It's a democratic structure, so everybody has a say. Everybody really has an influence on how things go down. And you compete with others. So remember, on the other one, there are enemies. This one you compete with others. Like you're excited, like let's do this, let's get out there and play. And again, I think you can all think of examples of pleasure and participation sports. Go ahead to the next slide. So sports participation, there's obviously also health benefits, and the book goes into it, but there's also health risks. You can get injured, which we'll be talking about. There's unhealthy lifestyles, eating disorders, eating too much, the drinking that is involved with sports. So there's some real negative effects as well. Violence, it's risky. So health benefits overall in competitive sports are significantly less. If you're playing football, soccer, hockey, there are some real risk of playing those sports. Go ahead to the next slide. So how does sports affect our lives and the study of sports experiences? Voices of participants indicate that, overall, it's a positive experience. I'm sorry, I'm getting my slide back up here. I just lost it. There we go. So people define and give meanings, depending on the relationships that they're in. And again, gender and all of that really play a factor. Go ahead to the next slide. So some additional studies talk about the locker rooms of women's ice hockey are key places for them to bond together, develop meanings, relationships, purpose. I would, we have our soccer team's locker room, I'll be honest. I don't know what goes on in there. I hear a lot of loud music and a lot of stuff going on, but I do know our locker room is a place where there's a lot of bonding that goes on before and after games. Even with practices, I know it's a spot where, people can just be themselves and it feels comfortable. So, it is interesting to find these avenues that athletes bond in and learn about each other outside of the field. Some athletes in high-profile sports, they get engulfed in their roles and they're deeply affected by these relationships, influences how others define and respond to them. Go ahead and look into that a little bit more. I'm going to continue on. Another finding is the social world of the boxing gym. They have found with boxers, it is a real avenue for athletes, specifically black males, to kind of release some of their negativity that is happening within the environments that they're in. Go ahead to the next slide. So sports sites for reaffirming ideologies. So sports are sites for struggling over who we are, how we think of ourselves, and so on. Sports are sites for people to create stories and make sense of the world. Well, this is why we do it. This is why, because, look at this story. Sports consist of vocabulary and images that often support dominant ideologies. So, for example, don't play like a girl. You throw like a girl. You run like a girl. That supports this idea that males, are better than females, or, there's no crying in baseball. You don't show emotions, things like that. And we'll get more into it. But those vocabularies and images that we see that we're like, oh, yeah, that's just what happens. Next slide, which is the socialization of community and culture process. So, there's these ideas where, the process of maintaining leadership, controlling, and gaining constant approval of groups, including those who are being led or controlled. Sports are important sites for, really providing pleasure and excitement for individuals. Go ahead to the next slide. So corporations pay a lot of money to have their names and logos and products associated with sports, and people believe that their pleasure depends on these corporations, and they're less likely to interfere with corporate interest. So you see the sign here, you have Coca-Cola and Coors Light and the Bake One and Rocky Mountain News, so we're constantly being exposed to these things. Go ahead to the next slide. So sports and socialization and ideology, research shows none of us live lives outside of the influence ideology. So none of us are above these ideologies. It's all within our lives, whether we mean it to be or not. Stories that emerge that are connected to sports experiences generally reproduce these ideas, which we've already touched on. Go ahead to the next slide. So most informative research on what happens in sports deals with everyday experience, the social world, which we've talked about, the world that you're in, that influences you a lot, and the community and cultural processes. Go ahead to the next slide. That is the end of chapter 3. So make sure that you have a good understanding of chapter 3. Now you're going to be ready to answer your discussion questions. You should be ready to take the quizzes and write, really after you get your peer responses done, write your personal reflection on the week. So if you have any other questions, please let me know. Thank you.